Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre.
And I'm Viano Ravinka. A recent ruling by a federal appeals court may have long-term effects on the way we access the Internet. The decision to effectively strip the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, of any power to regulate the Internet has restoked the fires under the net neutrality debate.
On this edition of Independent Sources, what is net neutrality? We talk about some of the consequences of the court's decision and can it be reversed?
Covering race, how a recent Nightline segment on the black woman's plight has fueled a raging internet debate about whether or not the issue was trivialized.
Then we meet New York City's Immigration Commissioner, Fatima Shama. Why does she call her job the one she always wanted while growing up but never knew it?
We'll have those stories and news of the week when we come back.
I think independent media often has a more narrow focus, or at least has more contact with the subject and more experience. And while that experience may come out in sort of nuanced, opinionated media, it's at least getting those stories out there that otherwise wouldn't be told.
Earlier this month, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit ruled that the FCC had limited power over web traffic under the current law. The decision will effectively allow Internet service providers such as Comcast and Time Warner to block or slow down specific websites. It also means that these ISPs could charge sites like Hulu to deliver their content at faster speeds. All this means the digital divide, the gap between those who can and cannot afford the Internet, is growing as price changes may be hitting consumers in the pocket pretty soon. But is there any recourse to this? Here to discuss this issue with me are Kristofer Ríos of People's Production House, and joining us via Skype from Washington, D.C. is Aparna Sridhar, Policy Counsel for Free Press Action Fund. Welcome.
Thank you.
Before we start, I want to note that our producers reach out to Comcast, Time Warner, and Cablevision to be part of the conversation. Comcast declined, and Time Warner provided us with a statement saying, quote, "We at Time Warner Cable are focused on providing our customers with a high-quality open internet experience that they expect. We believe that the evolution of broadband has been enormously successful and popular with the public. We look forward to continuing to work with the FCC and other regulators to continue to build on this success." Now, Chris, let's start with you. Give us a sense of what is net neutrality and really why is it that important?
Well, network neutrality, simply put, is the principle that says that the internet should be free and open, meaning that the content that's being shared over the internet is free for anyone to access, and that anyone can go ahead and put up what they want, share what they want using the internet.
So why is that important?
Well, it's important because to us, as community journalists, as media makers, it's the first medium, really, where we've been able to have our voices heard with very little barriers. I mean, there is a digital divide between those who have access and those who don't have access, and you have to be able to afford it. But if you can get to that point, if you can get to the library, or if you can get to an access point, you really, the world is yours. I mean, the information out there is easy for you to access, and if you're a media maker, or if you're just someone who wants to share, what you think or how you see the world, you can put it up.
So, Aparna, what does this ruling mean for broadband providers?
Well, it means that providers can slow down or block content as they choose. So they could slow down your access to Hulu, for example, or block it entirely, or the New York Times, or let's say you have a small community group that has a message board and you want to share information over that message board. They could block that content as well.
Why would they do that? Why would they do that? I mean, what's in it for them? Why would they do that?
Well, a really good example of what's in it for them is Comcast is proposing to merge with NBC, which is a big content company. They own a lot of different television shows and other kinds of content. And so you could see why it would be in Comcast's interest to promote its own content once it owns NBC and slow down everyone else's. So there's a huge business interest for prioritizing one kind of content over another kind of content.
So how does that affect President Obama's plan to have broadband access to people in the rural areas?
Well, so this decision was not just about the idea of slowing down or blocking content. It was about the FCC's framework for government oversight over broadband networks generally and broadband infrastructure. So because this ruling questioned the FCC's current regulatory framework for broadband overall, it jeopardizes the Commission's National Broadband Plan, and the entire point of the broadband plan is to bring broadband to rural and low-income Americans, to close the digital divide.
Speaking of low-income Americans, Chris, I know you work in the poor communities in the New York City area, and what are the fears of that community? How is this going to affect them?
Yeah, well, our biggest concerns are that this ruling will now allow for redlining, restriction, restricted access to the internet, and also metered service, meaning that internet service providers could charge you per usage. And for organizations and for communities of color, or organizations that service communities of color, that's a big problem. Already as it is, it's very difficult for communities of color to have their voices heard. They're marginalized when it comes to mainstream media, and they're marginalized when it comes to other forms of media. And if it's that much harder to afford the internet, to access the content that you want, to share the content that you're making, then it could potentially really increase this gap between those who have access to media and those who don't.
Are there measures that Congress can take to really regulate the broadband providers so that the situation that you're describing don't happen?
Well, I can't speak to any specific measures that Congress can take, but I can say that what we're asking for, what we're really hoping to see, is that the FCC reestablish its authority and get and have that under control to be able to regulate the networks so that we don't have this, so that we don't have the internet service providers redlining or restricting access.
What about that, Aparna? Is that possible? What can Congress do on this issue to really ensure that the public at large is not hurt by this ruling?
Well, I think Chris is right. The FCC has the ability to, in the near term, protect consumers and close the digital divide. And the way they could do that is revisit an earlier determination with respect to their regulatory framework. And they can say, look, it's clear that this framework doesn't work. It's time to move to a new framework that's equally permissible under the law. And so the FCC could certainly do that in the near term. And if they move to this new framework, they would have more solid legal authority to protect consumers using the internet and make sure that consumers could get access to the content of their choice. And they could have more solid legal authority to bring broadband to all Americans. Certainly, people have been talking about congressional action, but I think everyone recognizes that Congress does not move quickly, and the FCC needs to achieve these goals in a short time frame. So whatever Congress does is going to be a long-term fix. It's not going to be a near-term fix for consumers today.
Chris, what about in New York City, your work at People's Productions House? What is the next step for you guys?
Well, what we're really trying to do is, expand support for this issue within our communities, and also just expand the knowledge in the communities about not just broadband usage and network neutrality, but computer literacy, because we really feel that it's more than the internet. It's more than computers. It's about creating community and using computers and the internet to sort of elevate the things that are happening in our neighborhoods. And so what we've done is we've put in an application for the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program, and it's a federal grant, and hopefully if we get it, what we'll be doing is creating a network of computing centers where a lot of the big community organizations in New York City who have partnered with us will be able to offer broadband service to their communities, but also offer a literacy component where you're expanding the knowledge of these issues.
We'll have to wrap the conversation here today. This is definitely a topic we will keep an eye on in the coming weeks and months. Kristofer Ríos and Aparna Sridhar, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now here's Marlene Peralta with some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. An editorial published in El Diario La Prensa in collaboration with the Haitian Times, Caribbean Life, and Novogenic is asking for no more statements of intent on immigration reform. The editorial asked President Obama to make a real commitment, saying that unless a bill is introduced soon, that reform can be overshadowed by the Supreme Court nomination and the upcoming midterm elections. According to the editorial, immigration advocates have announced they are holding Senate leaders to a May 1st deadline for introducing a legislation. The Amsterdam News reports that homeless New Yorkers with a job will have to pay rent at city shelters. Although advocates are criticizing the measure, city officials say they are just complying with a state mandate established in 1997 but was never enforced. The law requires the working homeless to pay 44% of their income if they live in shelters. Next October's presidential election in Brazil will make history by having 2 women running for office. That's according to an opinion piece in the Brazilian newspaper. Economist and former Secretary for the Environment, Dilma Rousseff, is boosting her chances by having current President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva by her side. She represents the President's Workers' Party. The other candidate is Senator Marina Silva, representing the Green Party. From the forward, the social networking site Facebook has become a new way to remember victims of the Holocaust. Individual profile pages of victims have been created in an attempt to personalize the stories of the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust. Even the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum is helping, providing information to fill these profile pages. And finally, the Vatican is taking a step into the digital age. The Italian Tribune reports that thousands of ancient manuscripts will go from parchment to pixels very soon. The digitization of the more than 75,000 manuscripts will take 10 years to complete. It includes the Codex Vaticanus Graecus, the oldest known version of the Bible. Those are just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Vianora, back to you.
Thanks, Marlene. When ABC aired a story about the disproportionate number of never-married black women, many African Americans condemned the piece. Some said it made black men and women look bad. This once again raised the question as to whether or not mainstream media approach stories about race with nuance and sensitivity. With me to discuss the issue are Kelly Goff of the website theloop21.com and Andrea Plaid, sexual correspondent for the website Racialacious. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks. Before we begin, let's take a look at this piece filed by Abi Ishola about the ABC report and the follow-up segment.
For millions of black women, many blessed with brains and beauty, finding the right man is proving elusive. But why?
This 7-minute feature produced by ABC Nightline had the internet buzzing. The segment highlights a group of successful black women who are single and ready to be married, but can't find eligible black men.
We have this thing called the Black Girl Curse.
After the piece aired, it was posted on YouTube and viewed over 500,000 times to date. It quickly became the topic of heated debates on several black websites. Charreah Jackson and Jozen Cummings are both freelance writers and relationship bloggers. They say there were quite a few holes in the story.
Jozen, tell me how you felt about the segment on ABC.
It was just a story that I felt had been told time and time again, and there was no new news or information in that story. It was just the same old thing.
What do you think was missing?
The men. I mean, first off, that's always a frustration I feel when we talk about black love, that you get in a room and it's a room of black women. I just felt this ABC piece with other pieces we've seen in the media as of late, there's just this one heavy side of woe is the black woman who can't find love.
And some say black men were also singled out. The piece cites that out of 100 black men, only about half are eligible to pop the question, while the rest are either jobless, without a high school diploma, or incarcerated. Some also took issue with comedian-turned-relationship book author Steve Harvey being used as the expert.
His advice, go for the older man.
You have a biological clock. We don't.
Critics took to YouTube to vent their frustrations.
To me, this is nothing but a backhanded attack and slap to the face of the black man. So I wasn't trying to say in any way, black men, there are no good black men out there.
Lindsay Davis is the ABC correspondent who pitched and reported the story. She says some of her critics misunderstood her approach.
The main thrust of the piece was single black females and why 42% of black women have never been married, and why out of any race or demographic or gender, black women are the least likely to get married. That was the story. It wasn't about the decline in black marriage. It wasn't about why black people are not getting married. It was about the black woman.
But it's not just about black women to some, like Sharon Tumor, founder and managing director of Black and Brown News. She says it's a racially sensitive topic that requires more thought and reporting.
I don't think any issue is taboo for any journalistic organization. I do expect some organizations who have the resources and who have the ability to really dig a little deeper on why this is.
So ABC decided to produce part 2 of the story. This time, it was a panel discussion with comedian Sherry Shepherd, actor Hill Harper, and others. Comedian Steve Harvey was invited back to moderate the discussion. Tumor says she is floored that ABC News relied only on celebrities instead of social and economic experts to discuss the topic.
I would like for there to be, an understanding among black women that they stop doing these programs that use them as fodder for their comical treatment when dealing with this issue.
For Independent Sources, Abi Ishola.
Let me get your own reactions first to the ABC piece. Andrea, our interviewee called it a comical treatment of the topic. Do you think it was a comical treatment?
I don't think it was a comical treatment so much as I thought it was a pathetic treatment. I think that to use a man, for example, like Steve Harvey, who has been married 4 times, and if I'm not mistaken, he has married his mistresses, which speaks a lot to his expertise as far as a relationship expert, in the sense of, if he would have approached it as, these are my mistakes, and please take note of my unhappy end, that would have been different, but this is not what's being said. He's being touted as someone who knows what he's talking about. And the fact that he's a celebrity is the only reason why he's allowed to even have this platform, whereas they did not interview someone like a Melissa Harris Lacewell, who wrote a very incredible piece in The Nation about this particular issue, as to why black women are not getting married, if that's even a case.
Let me ask Kelly what her thoughts are.
Well, I would actually call it a comical piece that just wasn't funny. That's, because the way it was executed was sort of comical in that sense, but in a way that's sort of like funny as in not haha, but funny as in uncomfortable and wrong.
Right.
Or as I like to say, you're watching your drunk uncle toast at a wedding reception, right? That kind of level of funny, right?
Right.
It's not just about this one story. It's about the mainstream media in general and its lack of effectiveness at covering stories that matter to people of color.
Well, your organization, alongside with Unity, just published a survey according to which 95% of journalists of color believe that the mainstream media is not effectively covering race and race relations. In this particular case, though, we have
Can I just say something really quickly, though? I actually wonder what the other 5% think, because I'm surprised the number wasn't 100% being a person of color who is working in media, but who also enjoys media. Very rarely, I think, as a person of color, do you ever read a story that's done by the mainstream media and think, aha, they really got it right this time. It's just, I dare say it just doesn't happen.
And in this case, the reporter was black.
Right.
Where did things go wrong, you think? Andrea?
I think where it went wrong is I think the assumption is that because she was black, she would have had a great racial analysis. And I think it was the way it was put together. Again, it's the way they had celebrities speak on it. So I think again, we were saying before the segment started, the idea of the celebrity culture clashing with race analysis, and it was just done poorly. And I think that also the producer was disingenuous. This was about black women. You can't talk about that particular kind of issue without talking about black men, without talking about the sociological, as well as the historical, as well as the class analysis, as well as the I would say the history of the idea of why black women are seen as unmarriable.
So can I say that too? I think there's another part of the story, excuse me, which is we like to put media and journalism up on this pedestal, that it's saving the world and it's doing great things. And in some cases it has. You know, you have Watergate, but we also have TMZ, right?
And you have Sinclair, Upton Sinclair.
Okay.
Or Sinclair Lewis, rather.
Right. And so, but what I was going to say is that, especially today, media is morphing more and more into merging, if you will, into Hollywood, right? And so what I mean by that is, in Hollywood, how many times have you heard a story or seen this with your favorite book that's a great book, that's on a great subject, it's trying to tell an important, powerful story, and then a Hollywood executive gets his hands on it and says, it's perfect, we just have to add a bunch of naked women and a lot of car chases and more people need to get shot, and then it'll be but we're not changing the story. We still want it to tell an important story about, you know, the Holocaust or about slavery or about World War II. We just have to add these elements to make it marketable. And I think that's what happens when it comes to stories like this in the media sometimes. People start out wanting to do the right thing, and it's an important story. They have the best of intentions, and then their executive producer gets their hands on it and says, but we got to make this something that people will watch and talk about and that will get 500,000 hits on YouTube.
How much diversity in the newsroom matters?
Like I said at the beginning, I don't think that because you have a face there that's of color doesn't mean that necessarily you're going to have the analysis to go with the face. And I think that this particular situation is a perfect example of that.
I think it's not about quantity, it's about quality, and I don't just mean the quality of the journalist, I mean in terms of where the diversity is. We talk constantly about diversity, diversity, diversity. Well, I can show you a Fortune 500 company that has 15% African American employees, which is higher than the national population of our representation. But if they're all working in the mailroom, if they're all working on the cleaning crew, that doesn't make a difference. Same goes for media. It's fabulous to have journalists of color. What we really need is people in decision-making roles as people of color. And there aren't a ton of EPs of major news programming who are African Americans. In fact, I don't know if there's one for a major national news show or the Sunday morning news shows. That's really, I think, where we should be talking about seeing diversity.
In the light of the Obama presidency, your publisher, actually, Kelly, was quoted saying that it's imperative to have a dialogue now to examine how the media can better approach race relations. How confident are you that such a dialogue can take place anytime soon?
Well, luckily it started, but can I tell you what's funny is it hasn't started because the media said, let's come to the table and have a dialogue about race now that we have a black president. It started because they've made some high-profile missteps. You had Dan Rather making the watermelon comment about the president, which I wrote about. You've had people like Senator Harry Reid, who had the Negro comment, which my point is that it forced a lot of white people in high-profile positions to take a step back and look at what happens when you don't surround yourself with diverse voices and you're trying to frame conversations and stories. And I think that's an excellent thing, even if it causes us to have a few missteps to get where we need to go along the way.
And I think another example of that is, probably a very famous example, is what happened with the New Yorker and the Obama cover.
Right.
And I did a piece about that for Racialicious, in which I basically said, because Remnick did not surround himself with people of color, no one talked him off of that ledge of saying, maybe this is not a very great idea. And even though, and we also got to look at the idea of politics and who can do this. And I got into a conversation on Twitter about this with someone, and I said, just because a person is seen as liberal does not mean that they're necessarily going to do a great job. As much as we want to rag on conservatives and how racist they are, we also got to look at the quote-unquote liberal media or the mainstream media, and that's because they may have liberal politics doesn't mean that they're necessarily liberal about the issue of race.
And unfortunately, we will have to wrap it here.
Okay.
Kelly Goff and Andrea Plaid.
Yes.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Absolutely.
We'll be right back.
You promised me the world. Is this what you had in mind?
Help EarthShare and its members restore balance to the world. Visit earthshare.org and see what you can do. EarthShare, one environment, one simple way to care for it.
Few people dispute that immigrants built New York City and continue to make it one of the most desired destinations in the world. Today, about 40% of the city's more than 8 million inhabitants are immigrants. Over 170 languages are spoken, and 192 countries are represented in New York's 5 boroughs.
So in 2002, Mayor Bloomberg created a position on his staff to formally connect with immigrant communities. 2 commissioners have served since then, and we caught up with the current commissioner, Fatima Shama, 6 months into her job. Anjanette Levert talked with her about job challenges and her office's relationship with the immigrant and ethnic media.
Fatima Shama has a unique position with a huge mandate to keep a pulse of what's happening in the immigrant communities. As Mayor Bloomberg's Commissioner of Immigrant Affairs, she's the liaison between him and over 3.5 million New Yorkers who were born outside of the United States.
My job is incredible because I get to meet with varied communities. We have people from over 192 countries that live in the city, speak over 170 different languages, and my job is to actually interact with that entire incredible audience.
She stresses that the interaction needs to flow both ways, because with her small staff, it's virtually impossible to be in every community all the time.
There are community leaders who arise and are self-identified. There are faith leaders who sort of really serve as community voices. It's so important for them to feel like they're comfortable with us and have access to us because they have the real pulse, and it's that relationship that's critically important.
As a Bronx native, the daughter of a Brazilian mother and Palestinian father, she also speaks 5 languages. Some might say she's perfect for the job.
I see this as an opportunity, and I see it as an honor. I'm a product of immigrant parents who came in search of an American dream here, a product of our public school system in this city. I was born and raised in this city, born in a public hospital in this city, served as a translator for many years for my parents, so fundamentally understand what it means for them to not know how to access government, and professionally have decided that that's what I wanted to do.
With so many languages spoken in the city, getting the messages out are crucial. The immigrant and ethnic media, essential.
We cannot underestimate or understate the value and importance of what the ethnic media brings to this conversation, which is they become our messengers to people in their own languages, as well as to reaching the more hard-to-reach populations, because they're not reading the daily news that may or may not be reporting on something. They're reading their newspapers.
Already she's tackled a number of issues working with the immigrant and ethnic media.
Several of the campaigns that we have launched as a city around different policy areas have included some ethnic media outreach. I think that we've got to be smarter about how we do it, and we've got to probably increase that relationship and really cultivate that relationship. But I think that we're on that road.
With a little bit more than a half a year under her belt, she's learning to spend more time in the communities rather than behind the desk as she did when she first got the job.
I've learned a tremendous amount about who New York is and what some of the real challenges we've yet to really figure out solutions for our communities. I will openly admit that I feel that why hasn't this been done yet? And so I'm often reminded that Rome wasn't built in a day.
Anjanette Levert for Independent Sources.
That's our show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week.
In the meantime, be independent-minded.